how it all went south.
So, Sean, have you ever tried to smuggle something through the airport that you shouldn't have? Have you ever done one of those things? I don't know if it's like a fruit cake for Thanksgiving or maybe something a little bit more seemly. Like, ever try to do that?
I've never smuggled anything through the airport, but I've been with someone who has.
Right. There's always that other guy,
that
right?
That was in the rock band touring days. Yeah, that's all I'll say about it. But
yeah, you don't have to go any further. So I'm headed to Fiji this weekend, as you know, and I've never been there before. And I wondered if I smuggled something out of the country, what would be some of the exotic choices that I could sneak out. And I'm thinking mainly of animals. So here's the list I came up with of potential smuggled animals that I could lift out of Fiji. I'm not saying I'm doing it, but I'm saying these are potentials of mainly exotic animals. So the Fijian monkey-faced flying fox, which is potentially going extinct and only found in the mountains of one of the islands. A mongoose.
You don't want that.
A bolo snake.
Probably don't want that. But if you're going to, I would take the mongoose and the snake, just not at the same time.
Just to duke it out, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean,
yeah. So I'm not going to do it, but I would say that any of these would pale in comparison to the recent smuggling story of a South Korean national who tried to smuggle a whole lot of, quote, pets out of Peru this past November. Now, the contents that he tried to smuggle out: 320 tarantulas, 110 centipedes, and 9 bullet ants. And the worst, and I think most creepy part, is that they were all strapped to his body.
You said 300 something tarantulas?
320 tarantulas.
I'm just trying to figure out the physics of this.
So most of them were juvenile tarantulas in like little test tubey type things, but there was still about 30 something grown adult tarantulas, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But so fresh hell, which one gives you most terror? The tarantula, the centipede, or the ant?
Spider, hands down. Don't even need to think about it. Not a fan.
I know, right?
Dude, Arachnophobia, with John Goodman.
Yeah.
I love that movie, but it is like, I don't want to say one of the worst horror movies for me to watch, but it is. I've seen it 40 times or whatever. I still, find myself, there's a little shadow on the wall out of the corner of your eye. Like, it just creeps me out. I had an experience with tarantulas when I was a little kid.
Oh, no way. What was it?
In Texas, yeah. I had family in Texas, and we actually lived there for a little bit. We were considering living there, and we were playing a wiffle ball or something in the backyard of my aunt and uncle's house with my cousins, and, summertime, bare feet. And at the edge of their property was tall grass, and the wiffle ball went into the tall grass. We're all, looking for it, and you're kind of fanning through the tall grass with your feet. And as I looked down, as I fanned over, there was a tarantula nest. And I mean, it was.
How old were you?
Dude, I was like 6. And I can just remember running, screaming into, because I almost stepped on it, and I just remember screaming and running into the house. Terrified ever since. That's
tough. I can't give you too much heat that, because it happened at such a young age. I think like a recluse or a wolf spider or something like those, like that's tough. But I actually think of tarantulas, centipedes, and bullet ants in context of something weird, which is, down south here, we don't, a lot of us have full basements. We have crawl spaces, and crawl spaces freak me out because I think those spiders, centipedes, and ants are the things that if you've got to get into that crawl space and you're on your stomach, you might be looking at one of those. And that terrifies me. It's the close space, but it's also those, those awful things, right?
Yeah, go into the crawl space if you haven't been in there for a while, of any house in the South, for sure.
Right,
in the South.
right.
And I mean, all it is, I went in to change my air filter for my,
Yes.
the other day. It's funny that you bring that up. And I mean, it's like there were so many just giant spider webs everywhere that I had to take a stick and knock them down to even get to it's so, you're just like, yeah, it's so gross.
I know.
I hate it.
So that's the fresh hell that I live in. Is it's not thinking necessarily about the tarantula, the centipede, or the ant. It's like, for some reason, I always think of the red dirt in the crawl space, and it just feels confining. And an old friend of mine used to work on houses and construction. He used to have to sweep out these houses as they were wrapping up. He used to have to go in the basement, had to get in crawl spaces and dig the crawl spaces out. I was like, dude, how can you do this every single day when you go to work? He's like, well, what's the big deal if there's a spider? I'm like, no, you don't understand.
Well, yeah, but that's like, I know we're getting a little off topic here, but I mean, I remember living in a house one time, and when I first moved to Georgia, and had a water leak, and when the guy from the water company showed up, you open the little box on the ground where the main valve is,
Yeah,
and he took off the lid, and there were two black widows, and I mean, one was huge and the other one was not quite as big, but I was I mean, the guy is like has to get a stick, and I mean, but if it's at nighttime and you don't either there's a leak or something, you have to turn the water off and you reach your hand in there, I mean, that's the stuff that freaks me out.
So we are going off topic, but I do have to tell this story, which is during the pandemic when, everything was shut down. I remember, and I, live in a decent neighborhood, so it's not like there's piles of trash everywhere. But our sewer system here in Atlanta is notorious for lots of rats running through it, like old sewer, new sewer. Like there's just a lot happening under the city that we don't see. And I remember seeing, while no one's out, I could see it from my front window, just rats crossing the street in the middle of the day, and they didn't care. And there was there's no police. No one's gonna get us.
I remember seeing that a couple of times. Well, more than a couple of times, but in LA, and but the thing is they're like normal size rats,
right?
And in Atlanta too, it's like it's a normal size rat. Have you seen the pictures from New York?
Yes.
And I mean, and it's no joke. And they talk about the rats being as big as groundhogs, and
they have a rat czar now.
Yeah, they do. It's so nuts. And if you haven't, if you haven't ever like actually seen how big those sewer rats get in New York City, Google that right now. They are massive. It's like the size of a small dog or a raccoon or something.
Yeah, put a saddle on them, right?
Oh God. Anyway,
I think we
back to this jackass who has tarantula spiders, duct taped to his body.
He's literally like think of this at the airport or wherever he is. He's like strapping dynamite to his chest, like he's going to hijack the plane, but he's in fact strapping all these crazy insects and animals there. It's crazy. So SURF4, which is Peru's Wildlife and Forestry Service, said they became suspicious when the man's stomach appeared swollen. I mean, just walking around, what do you got there? Well, just a bunch of tarantulas,
Yeah. I would assume it would be that it was like misshapen or odd,
right?
Like it's kind of like what if you go up to someone who's overweight and they're like, lift your shirt up. So
yeah,
that could go one of two ways.
Yeah. So according to SURF4's press materials on this, 35 of the tarantulas were adult-sized and were about the size of a human hand. And we'll show these photos on YouTube, but you can see them after capture. And each is in kind of one of those clear Tupperware-style containers, and they're stacked like 5 tall in 5 different stacks, just hanging out.
Oh, yeah. So he had like a big square imprint in his shirt that had, I mean... How would you?
No, this is what they did with him afterwards.
Okay.
Like you see what they got.
I'm just picturing this guy.
Yeah, and so the juvenile tarantulas were stuffed in tubes with each end stopped to keep them from escaping. It was basically what happened. But there's also those ants and centipedes, which centipedes creep me out too. So I I do have another side note. Have you ever seen the movie Kingdom of the Spiders? So it's about
Nope.
1978, 1979, and the lead actor is none other than William Shatner. And the acting in this is just
Fantastic, I'm
just
sure.
outstanding. And so the
Oh
premise
no,
is,
those
oh no,
spiders
spiders.
are
Oh my
coming.
God. Bones. He's in a cabin and they discover all these tarantulas. Oh, and they start to come out of the woodwork. This is in the era of airplane and every disaster movie and everything that's happening, right? And eventually the tarantulas take over the entire town with like this massive spider web. And like I was probably it's like 7, 8, 9 years old. It burned in my brain. So
Sure.
I wasn't, it wasn't real, but I was traumatized by that also.
Yeah, that's kind of like me in the Blob. You remember that movie?
I do. Yeah.
To this day, I'm still terrified of
Blobs.
giant alien morphing blobs.
It's very specific.
Gelatinous goo.
So the Korean national, the smuggler, had intended on taking them back to Korea with a planned stop in France. Now, Peru has had a huge issue with these species being smuggled out of the country and has really cracked down on the illegal export of these species out of the country. But when smugglers go to great lengths like these, it's very difficult to spot them. And, they're worth a lot of money on the other side. And it's a huge problem.
Yeah, it's crazy to me. I mean, smuggling of things like that, animals, think of how many animals are probably in cages that are in shipping containers all around the world. You know what I mean? Aside from people and everything else that's being smuggled around the world. But how much could a spider be worth? You know what I mean? To like risk that. I have no idea. Maybe it's a ton of money, but like how much could a tarantula be worth? It's so...
What are they doing with them?
And why could you not just buy tarantulas from someplace where they're legal, or
or just buy two?
This is why I'm not an animal spider smuggler.
Right. And by the way, I bet you the centipedes are not the tiny.
No, they're probably those giant jungle centipedes.
Yeah,
they're like the size of your forearm.
The ones that they have kind of in the new King Kong movies when they're in the desert and they've kind of morphed into these huge creatures. Who knows? So, of course, I couldn't let it go by just covering that one case of smuggling. It led me to go down a rabbit hole, as usual, of other incredible smuggling adventures. So, of course, you would imagine drug smuggling as being the most popular type of smuggling activity. But I found a story from 1993 where drug runners stuffed 80 pounds of cocaine into 312 boa constrictors on their way to Miami.
I heard about that.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know anything about it, but I remember hearing about that.
So after inspectors at the Miami airport noticed unnatural bulges in the boas, they x-rayed them and discovered that each had double-wrapped condoms inside of them containing the cocaine. Each of the snakes died due to the trauma of the injection, and also the ones that were able to survive that, they died of heat stroke because they were left in a hot van as they were like moving things and trying to get away with this. That's pretty brutal, right?
Yeah, sure.
Like who smuggles that many boa constrictors? But like here, shoving it down their throat. Yeah,
that's horrible. And I'm sure there's probably examples of so many different kinds of animals that have been abused and just, from, they don't care. I mean, people have found so many, I don't want to say good, but creative ways of smuggling things. I mean, there was something the other week in the news where someone had smuggled coke or meth or something like that. Yeah. And it was a lot. It was like in kids' cereal or fruit snacks or something. I mean, It was like packaged. It's wild. It's wild.
They get really, really creative when they need to. Here's
What if you could
Yeah.
apply your skills, young man?
Here's another one. Speaking of creative, cattle have also been used to smuggle drugs in, and how they do it is, of course, especially tough on the animals. So this is crazy. A vet operates on the cattle and inserts 40 to 50 kilos into the stomach. That's one. Two, condoms filled with drugs are inserted into their rectum. So, like, easiest way in, easiest way out. And then neutering. So, what they do is it's very specific, very detailed. They take the testicles out and they put drugs where they were and sew back up the skin with drugs.
How much drugs could you really like? That almost just seems not worth it for all the work you're putting into it.
I know, right?
I could see if you were smuggling like diamonds that way,
Right, right. But it's just you're right. It's a lot of work, right? Like, come on,
right now there's a jewel thief going.
So this is interesting. TSA catches a lot of stuff, of course, at the airports, and they have this once a year YouTube video where they talk about some of the top stuff that they've caught, and they've done it the last couple of years, and they're kind of corny videos. We'll show you a couple highlights. This is from 2022. Here are some of the top catches: soiled money crutches, cattle prod guitar case, a gun inside a PlayStation, a firearm inside of a jar of peanut butter, and a gun inside a raw chicken. So those are some of the highlights from 2022. Why is it raw?
I want to see what the excuse is when they yeah, excuse me, sir. Can you come over here? Why is there a raw chicken? What excuse would you use for flying a raw chicken on a commercial airline?
And by the way, it's when they put it through the X-ray machine, they still see the gun.
Yeah.
And they're like, "What's the thing around the gun?"
What is that?
That's just raw chicken, sir. And
how'd that get there?
I know. And here's a few more from last year, 2023. Missiles in your luggage, a firearm along with, or kind of in the same case, 163 bullets. Because if you're going to go big, right? Go big or go home. If you can make it through security to go home, and then of course weed in a baby's diaper.
Yeah, sure.
And
it's funny because you mentioned guitar case earlier, and I can tell you that I don't know if it's just when you travel with a band and you just look whatever hungover, haggard, whatever, you've been traveling all over the world but I would say 95% of the time I ever flew through an airport anywhere in the US with a guitar case, which I always had a guitar with me. So, every time they would make you go into the little room and they would wipe the bomb chemical test that they do.
Interesting. Really?
Yeah, they would wipe it all over it. They would open it up. They'd wipe it on the guitar. And I always found that, it doesn't bother me, but I always found it interesting. Like, what is it about me or a guitar, a guitar case? You open it up, there's a guitar.
So you were carrying it on every time because you didn't want to lose it.
Well, yeah, just, if you have an expensive guitar, it's like sentimental value or whatever. I always would carry it. And that way you just, I've seen too many horror stories.
Yeah, I think it was you.
I mean, it's just funny that it's like literally 95% of the time.
Yeah.
Always the bomb test.
Yeah. Well, I don't think, that doesn't happen to me that as often.
Well,
as you would imagine.
Yeah.
All right. So last one here. It seems pretty bold and out in the open, but a man named David Philip Turner was indicted in Texas on charges of unlawfully flying an aircraft. Now, he had attempted, this is another kind of smuggling, but he had attempted to use a drone to drop wire cutters and other tools along with money, cell phones, charges, and tobacco into a federal prison complex near Beaumont, Texas. So, you can think about that in the prison yard, and all of a sudden, just just dropping stuff from the sky.
Didn't we? Did you do a story in the show, or did we talk about recently or a little while ago a woman who learned to fly a helicopter and went to break in a prison or break someone out of a prison? Like she went and got her helicopter pilot's license and everything.
Yeah, yeah. Bound and determined, right?
So ballsy.
I know. So people, these smugglers, it's not like this guy strapping tarantulas to his waist. It's not like they're just finding ways to ship this in, the back end of a cow. They're also, like they're part of this process and at high risk. You talk about you getting swabbed with your guitar case. Like if you've got the tarantulas, it's on you. And like they're going to bust you too. Like if you're flying the drone, they're going to find you also. So you got to be kind of ballsy on this stuff.
To say the least.
All right, so that's what I had. We will be back in a minute with what Sean has around some pretty dumb criminals and crimes.